Hello and good day, everyone. Thank you for coming back to join me at the kitchen table. My guest this week was Mitchell, co-founder of the Kilometer Media channel, which you can find on YouTube. And we had an excellent conversation that started off talking about YouTube and commentary and politics and culture, and then went totally off into left field, and it was really fun. So I hope you enjoy it. And also stick around for time for the show tonight at 10 o'clock. Check out Freethinkradio on the YouTube channel where you can find this episode after it airs. Freethinkradio on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook. Join our Discord. Ask us about the Pale Horse. It's pretty freaking cool. And thanks for stopping in, guys. All right, awesome. So, starting from the top, Mitchell, thank you so much for joining me at the kitchen table. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Martha, thanks so much for having me. This is my first interview, so I'm super excited just to talk on a bunch of things that I've had welling up inside of me for some time now.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this is going to be a good conversation. I'm glad we arranged this. So, but before we get into the meat and potatoes of things, I was hoping you could maybe just give me a little bit of background about what motivated you to start your channel on YouTube, Kilometer Media, and a little bit about what you are doing with the channel.
Yeah, sure. So Kilometer Media is a pretty recent development. One of my friends and I, we always talk politics, and we just decided, we might as well just try to do this YouTube thing, get some information out there, because we want to expand the conversation beyond just our social circle. So we figured connecting with other people on YouTube, people like yourself, is probably a really would be a good thing for us to do, just in terms of being able to keep the conversation going, because in the public sphere, a lot of the time, the conversation is being shut down, and we're not so confident on who we can even speak to about certain issues because a lot of people are so sensitive. So we figure, we'll put it online, we'll put it out there to the masses, and then we'll see who bites. And we'll keep the conversation evolving, and hopefully we'll all broaden our understanding a little bit about what's happening specifically with Canadian politics. That's the main interest of the channel, but we're not limited to just that. I think we're going to expand into the realm of health a little bit as well. I'm actually a former vegan, so I'm waking up to a lot of things, negative health effects of having been vegan for 3 or 4 years. And, so we're going to expand our horizons beyond just the realm of politics. But right now, that's kind of where we're sitting. And I think we just started our channel in April. So, did you ask what inspired? If you asked us what inspired us to start the channel, I could start from the beginning.
Sure.
It's kind of a long. It's a little bit of a long story. Ultimately, I think the music scene is what originally drove us into becoming interested in politics. Everybody who's a member of Kilometer Media was also a musician at some point. And my co-associate and I also have a band together. It's been wild. We don't really try to do too much in terms of being big famous musicians or trying to make a name for ourselves anymore, because I became really disillusioned over the years leading up to now playing with a much more popular touring band in the hardcore scene. So we toured, between 3 and 5 months of the year through Canada and the USA. Just in our bus.
Cool.
And so we got to see everything evolve firsthand, which is really cool. So some of the nuances of the music scene in the United States in 2016, it was very politically minded.
Oh, I bet.
2016 being the American election.
Yeah.
So we're sitting up in Canada, you watch all the news and you just see Hillary Clinton's like winning in the polls. Everybody's ready for Clinton, right? And you're thinking, there's no way this Trump guy is going to get in. Now, meanwhile, my band and I were driving around in the United States, and we're stopping in all these smaller places, rural towns, bigger cities too. But we played all around the Midwest, out on the West Coast too, around Lake Ontario, Lake Erie on the other side, the other side of the border. And yeah, it's wild. The spin that the media puts on everything, it would have you believe that almost everyone was a supporter of the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton in 2016. But driving around for 5 months that year, I maybe saw 2 or 3 Clinton signs on people's front lawn compared to near 1,000 Trump signs.
Yeah.
It was it was outrageous. Like the amount of people that actually supported Trump just outright, and the fact that the media was like so silent on it and was trying to convince us Canadians that the Americans were in favor of Clinton. But when
Trump
we were down there and even speaking,
Trump had no chance.
Yeah, they were trying to convince everyone of that. But when we were down there speaking to individuals, we realized that nobody was going to vote for anyone else. And this is in the hardcore scene too, which I don't know if you're familiar with hardcore music as a subgenre.
Yeah, I am. I'm not into the scene, but I'm familiar.
Cool. So a lot of it is rooted in sort of like high moral ground behaviors, things like veganism and straight edge. In the 80s, those are big things.
Yeah.
So if you were drinking at a show or something like that, there was like this sort of violent thing that would happen called straight edge revenge, and this still happens to this day when we were in the scene. And straight edge kids will see these people doing things they don't morally agree with, and they'll go and they'll punch them. And it's called hate mushing. It's a form of hardcore dancing, which is like pretty niche, but like it's really not like after you spent a year or two in the hardcore scene, you get pretty used to it, and it's just a part of all the shows is that there's these militant straight edge people that have the moral high ground, or they claim to have the moral high ground, and they enforce it with violence. So it's really interesting that we're playing hardcore shows in the United States, and nobody supports Hillary, and they're all like vegans, straight edge,
yeah.
Everyone is very pro-Trump, pro-free speech, pro-gun, like down there, and yeah, even the people who are, just like skinny musicians, like kind of countercultural, like anti-politics altogether, but they're definitely, the spin is just outrageous. We were totally duped into thinking one thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of my first step into the realm of politics and seeing it firsthand on the ground. And that's what got me really interested in speaking to individuals and trying to explore it deeper than you can just like see on CNN or Fox or CBC or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you got a really unique perspective on it too, and especially seeing it from like within a counterculture kind of circles where you see that it was really, and I think this is kind of more obvious in hindsight, but Trump was like the anti-authoritarian kind of choice, no matter where you kind of sat culturally.
Yeah, it seemed as though he was anti-Republican, even though he was part of the Republican Party. So a lot of people that typically wouldn't vote Republican voted for Trump just because he was sort of that populist outlier that people could relate to, in the way that he spoke. And I think post-Obama, everybody was so sick of the political correctness thing in the United States that, pendulum swings.
Yeah,
no doubt that he got elected.
Okay, so you get to see all of this stuff with your band, and you become more, I guess, aware of it, and as a consequence, more immersed in it. Then what was it like kind of coming back to Canada with that new perspective?
Well, a lot of people didn't agree. That was definitely a big part of it. It was hard. I voted Trudeau as well, which that was a mistake. At the time I thought it might have been a good thing, but he's done a lot of things I haven't agreed with. I know there was that Trans-Canada pipeline up, I think it was like Alberta, BC area, where he had a bunch of the First Nations protesters were arrested, and he was saying that the elders had no jurisdiction over this land, and the RCMP was up there. I'm pretty sure they were tear gassing people, and this is under Trudeau, so I think everybody thinks he's this very kind, like multicultural dude who wouldn't hurt a fly, and he has nice hair, and it's just ridiculous. I think that's like a big problem too, is that I don't think people are interested enough in politics to be able to look deeply, like past just those sort of shallow talking points, or just the fact that he looks nice. I don't think a lot of people have the energy or the time to be able to look into those things. So, yeah, he got voted in. He kind of screwed everybody up with a few of his scandals. I know he was going on vacation with taxpayer money. There's that whole SNC Lavalin scandal,
Yeah.
which is really complex. I'm still trying to completely wrap my head around it. But to my understanding, I guess he was there was some Quebec company that they were allowed to drill some specific way in some country in the Middle East that was violating. You see, it's over my head. I had looked into it before, but it's not off the top of my head. I know it was a big deal, at the very least.
The background details I'm just as sketchy on with the contracts in, I think it was Libya. I don't know all the details on, but I mean, essentially, it was Trudeau trying to finagle the, what's her title there? Jody Wilson-Raybould, to keep them out of a criminal trial.
Oh, that's right, and she didn't, and then she got fired.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, good guy.
Real feminist.
She was a First Nations woman too, right?
Yeah. I think she was the first First Nations woman to hold a cabinet position, or to hold that particular cabinet position at least.
Yeah, I can't understand why people think that Trudeau is such a, just. A lot of people just think he's such a Puritan, right? He could never hurt a fly, but he's part of a political dynasty. Like Pierre Elliott Trudeau was his father, right? It just, I don't know. It doesn't really make sense that we continue to elect like members of the same family. We have this idea of free democracy, but like, we got the Bush family, the Clinton family, all these like big powerful families that just somehow retain power. It doesn't feel like democracy, I'll tell you that much.
No, it definitely has an undermining effect, at the very least. Yeah,
most definitely.
But yeah, all right. So I know. I mean, it seems like post-Trump, any scene or area of culture or work or society at large. I mean, unless you were basically out in the middle of nowhere in a log house, whatever you were doing is going to be affected by politics, because it really seems to have had that effect, right? Like it's become, and I think you were saying that when that hit the music scene that you were involved in, that's really what kind of was the catalyst for you to be more involved or more public.
More politically minded, for sure. Just to see the disparity between what was actually happening and what the media was saying was happening. That's what really piqued my interest.
Yeah, I think that was it for a lot of people, actually. Because when they started seeing things on the ground or in their own life versus how they were portrayed as trends or even as specific incidents in the media, it's really been a big factor for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and you're close to Toronto, too. I mean, where a lot of the Canadian incidents, I guess you could say, have taken place, like all of the kind of Jordan Peterson protests that happened post-Trump, like 2016, 17.
Yeah, that's where it all comes out of, I'm pretty sure. In this part of Canada, everything sort of pours out of Toronto. This big steaming mass, strange new culture. I don't know where.
The smoking pile.
I don't know where it comes from either. It seems to just. I think Toronto is a city that's it's subjected to more corporate interest than most cities around here, just because of the sheer amount of money and power, which is central to the structure of the city. I mean, there are advertisements everywhere. That's where all the bands go to play the biggest shows.
Yeah.
It just kind of makes sense that the culture evolves from inside the cities, and then slowly but surely you can see cities along. I don't know if you know the 400 highways because you're an Ontarian.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Yeah. So you can see that maybe after 2-3 years, like places like Waterloo, London, Hamilton, all of those places are starting to catch on now too, because they're on the major highways.
Yeah.
Connected to Toronto. And then when you go off into like little rural Ontario places like Huron County or like some of the beach towns, like they have no idea what's going on unless they have the internet. And a lot of people, they're not, they're just kind of cursory glances at Facebook. They'll have like some shallow opinions about this or that, but it's the big urban centers. I think it's where people really, really go deep and where things are really happening. So I'm always on the fence about trying to separate myself completely from the system in order to, maintain, homeostasis, I guess you could even say, just to be on the level. And then there's this other part of me that just wants to go into Toronto and, find out what's going on, see what I can do to help. Obviously, it feels like each day we're getting closer and closer toward, like, complete cultural collapse. I've actually predicted, and, if it doesn't happen, then whatever. But I seriously think that there's going to be some crazy event in the next, 10 or 15 years that will affect the borders of the United States and Canada, just because people are so fractured these days, and especially in places like Toronto, because as connected as we are with our technologies, we're also extremely disconnected in terms of our humanity. A lot of people don't even, speak the same language as their neighbors. I know we live across the street from a few Chinese people. They are great. They help us with our garden, which we're trying to make in Toronto. The soil there's awful.
Right.
It's very much like clay. But it's hard just to communicate, and we try our best. But I think that the fact that people are so disconnected just because they're wired in, they have their headphones on, they can go and watch their televisions. They don't really talk to their neighbors like you would in a small town. The place that my parents grew up, they would walk into their neighbor's house and just, give them a shout. Like, they'd open the front door. Yeah. And that was the type of relationship that I think that, the older generations had with their neighbors, whereas now we're just very isolated. We're in our own little cubicles, and it's contributing to a lot of disparity and a lot of fractured opinions. Sorry if this is a bit of a long tangent, but
no worries. I think it's totally relevant.
I think that the opinion being so fractured right now, I've equated it to people don't agree on what happened in the past. We don't agree on our history. Yeah. People, they don't look at the effects of communism in Russia, and a lot of people haven't heard of the Gulag or anything like that. And a lot of people are pushing for socialism despite our history. We're very ignorant of our history, and a lot of people don't agree on how it happened. You're seeing a lot of revisionism lately too, especially in the United States of America. Statues are being taken down. People that used to receive veneration are, now kind of hate symbols. I know Andrew Jackson, he was a man that fought the bank. He took it down in its last incarnation before the Fed. Andrew Jackson was able to stop the big bankers, the globalist bankers, from stepping too far into the United States. And I don't know, maybe he had something to do with slavery. I'm not read up on Andrew Jackson or why he's considered a hateful individual, but I know that his statue got taken down as a result. So strange, you have this American, this classical American historical figure, and it's just he's not relevant anymore because of certain behaviors which he partook in, which are not acceptable by today's standards. So we're able to retrofit our standards onto the path of our history.
Yeah, and you see the same thing in Canada, especially lately with John A. Macdonald. He's been kind of the most targeted, I think, for removal. I know his statue was removed from the City Hall in Victoria, in BC.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think that was about a year ago or so. And it's not even just in kind of public displays, public places. I mean, even universities, have started kind of rewriting curriculum to, alter the canon, so to speak.
Fit the new paradigm.
Yeah. So there is certainly revision. There's a revisionism craze almost happening.
Yeah, definitely. And I what I've been noticing too is just with revisionism, I feel like it goes hand in hand with accelerationism, where, you know, when things are changing, the changes keep happening faster and faster, and a lot of people are having a really hard time keeping up. So, like, for example, like, you know, when I was a kid, people used to call each other fags. People used to call each other retards.
Yeah, things were gay and lame.
Things were gay and lame.
Yeah.
And that didn't mean
or retarded.
Homosexual. And that didn't mean that you had Down syndrome or autism.
No.
And now it's like people have become so sensitive to this like politically correct culture that people are like people off the 401 highways in these little rural communities that don't know the new culture. They're bigots and they don't even know it.
Yeah.
They can't keep up. And I feel so bad for those country bumpkins out there that are still, they're just getting chastised left and right.
That's a huge point, and I don't know if it gets talked about a lot or realized a lot, but I noticed that too as someone who kind of has lived in Canada's major cities but is from rural areas and has, you know, frequently lived in each. There's a big disconnect. And I find, like you said, because rural communities tend to be less plugged in to media and social media and online culture, they're just become
a little behind.
Yeah. And being hugely misunderstood, I think, because of it too, you know, and misrepresented in some cases, like. And it's like you said, even just with the changes in language. Like I was listening to some old Opie and Anthony reruns a while back, and you know they've got like Bill Burr and Louis C.K. and all of these, you know, who are now big name comedians on back in their earlier days, and they're all calling each other fags and like things that you could never even say on satellite radio now.
Oh yeah, like. Do you know what I watched? Eddie Murphy on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of his stand-up. I'm pretty sure it was Eddie Murphy. It was one of his stand-up comedy routines from the 1980s. If you're interested in finding it, it's like I'm pretty sure he was wearing like a red leather suit in it.
I know exactly the one you mean.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to identify from the thumbnail. But holy crap, man! Not only was he like using the words like fag and gay and all that, but he was just tearing into gay people like as comedy. And as it was actually came as a shock to me because I'd never heard anything like that. I didn't think that, especially like a big tech sort of company like Netflix would let something like that fly. But it's outrageous. I don't know. You could go listen to it. And just no doubt the times have changed. You're not allowed to say those things anymore. And I feel like it might be better in certain ways. Just to be more careful about like how you speak about people when you are in such a position of high popularity, because comedians especially, like a lot of people will just follow suit, right? Like the comedian has the opinion and that's the opinion, just like the news station has the opinion, now that's my opinion. So I don't know. I think comedy's really, really unique though, because I don't know if I don't really believe that comedians have a responsibility to their audience to make sure that, you know, what they're doing is what they're saying is moral, or I think the only requirement for being a comedian is that you're supposed to be funny, and it's amazing what was funny in the 1980s to people, because that's not funny at all anymore. Like it's the exact opposite. It might be funny because it's so forbidden, but I don't think a lot of people would genuinely laugh at some of that stuff Eddie Murphy said in the 80s, like specifically, like it's pretty brutal.
Yeah, I think. I think comedy is a kind of its own creature. You know, you can't really hold it to the other standards that you would hold other kinds of public discourse necessarily, because, like you said, I mean, it's you know, the ultimate goal is comedy and kind of the absurd in a way. It's not, and the idea that a comedian should always, you know, be first and foremost trying to not hurt someone's feelings, I think would just end up, you know, I mean, what can you ever say anymore? Yeah, that would actually maybe be kind of some kind of weird, like, meta comedy skit or something.
I could see that coming out of a sketch show or something like that.
Yeah,
to the
but I
YouTube
mean,
channel.
that's kind of like the way comedy's changed and become so much more PC, I guess you could say. I think has to do a lot with something that I saw you touch on in one of your videos, which is this call-out culture that's kind of really become a thing with social media, basically.
Oh yes, see that's the newest thing is to just, if you disagree with somebody, to just make them disappear, and it seems pretty effective in silencing a lot of people.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
I
a
don't know what
really
Louis C.K. is doing anymore.
and it's really kind of like a weird thing to see become more and more common at the same time that you have all of this rising awareness about like anti-bullying and inclusion, but at the same time it's becoming more and more acceptable to, like you said, like just disappear somebody who you disagree with or who's offended you, whether or not they even intended to.
Yeah, well, I think that's just the thing, is that these tech companies kind of have their own agendas. You know, I think it's like, it's not necessarily, oh, silence the bully, but it's that whole idea of like, well, who's the bully?
Yeah.
You know, because there's two sides to every story, right? And you know, maybe that kid who's beating the shit out of the other kid in the playground just got sand thrown in his eyes, right? So it's like,
yeah, maybe he's just had enough of that bully shit. Like,
yeah, so he wants to say something about it, and so that's just the thing. I think that these tech companies, they're I know that Facebook specifically, I'm pretty sure it was either Facebook or Twitter. They actually have pictures of like communist radicals just like behind their front desk, which is really interesting. Not that, you know, I think that the technocracy is communistic or fully anything like that. I think that's far too vague an assessment. But these tech companies definitely have political interests, which are aligned with some of the radical leftist views that are coming out, and some of the laws which are, you know, a result of it, like hate speech. Those laws are very new, and it still hasn't been clearly defined. So the big tech firms are just able to say, oh, anything that is hate speech, we could ban. So you don't really know when you're committing it, and they can just ban you. And so they just kind of ban whoever they disagree with. They just silence whoever they disagree with. And I think that's awful. I mean, that's awful in terms of like advancing public discourse and like increasing our understanding of issues. Like if we aren't able to listen to opposing viewpoints, if you have an emotional reaction to something which is so intense that you have to absolutely disappear that other person, like I can't see our society becoming any more intelligent. And I can only see it just getting worse and worse and worse, and having to subject itself to any whim of the technocracy, you know, the big bosses that run Facebook, like Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey at Twitter.
Yeah.
Those guys, they can just kind of decide like what's acceptable behavior and what's not. And in terms of conversation, I think more people talk on social media than they do in real life. So I think we've reached a really, really strange impasse where you have to be really careful what you say online. Otherwise you're going to be silenced, and maybe worse, you know, a lot of people get doxxed, they lose their jobs.
Yeah.
They can't do anything else. Like I know some people are having their PayPal disabled. I think Alex Jones was one of those.
Yeah.
That's absolutely terrifying. I had this idea that I saw that Facebook released, I don't know if they are implementing it yet, but they have a cryptocurrency of their own called Libra.
Really? I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, it's a very new thing, and I imagine that you're going to be able to participate in online marketplaces such as Amazon.
Right.
You know, using this cryptocurrency, and they'll probably kind of give you a bonus. They'll be like, hey, you know, if you're going to use Libra, you can get 10% off.
Yeah.
Because it's old, you know, sort of cash society. It's outdated.
Oh, for sure. There'll be like incentives. Absolutely.
Yeah. But then you're going to get banned from Facebook, and you're going to get banned from using the Libra currency.
Yeah.
And you're going to get banned from being able to use that marketplace. It's like, it's going to create like a whole separate world where it's like you're going to be banned from the digital world, and you're going to have to close your computer and walk outside to that old grocery store kind of thing. Like, I don't know. I see such increasing dichotomy between the technological digital world and the real world where we grow plants and go to grocery stores and talk with each other in person. Like, it's totally different. And yeah, I personally, I would love for hate speech to be more clearly defined. Because when I was a punker, when I was like 13, 14 especially, I renounced Christianity and I used to talk so much shit about it. And I'm pretty agnostic now. I'm accepting of anybody who's not really dogmatic and pushy with their religion. But I'll critique the hell out of it, especially to my family were so devout, right? So I had to stand my ground on a lot of issues just to make sure that, well, that I just had my opinions, and they couldn't be moved by somebody who only could go as far as saying, "Oh, I have faith," or "You're not allowed to question it because that's sin." It's strange now that, like, criticism of certain religions, Christianity, I mean, you can pretty much talk as much shit as you want, as far as I'm concerned, online. I don't think there's any protection against Christian identity online, but I know some of the more...
Not that I've noticed.
Well, no, not in Canada, at least. Yeah. Minority religions, I guess, here are protected, like Islam and Judaism. They both have laws which regulate what you're able to say about them.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of scary because, you know, each religion, they're so ancient. Like, how do we possibly interpret them correctly to apply them to our modern age without having some sort of problem? And if we're not able to critique them and we're not able to, like, decide, you know, speak as a group, it's really, really frightening. But here's the thing about religion, and this is why I'm not worried about Islam in Canada. I seriously think that, like, people like me are not few and far between. Like, I was raised Christian. My family baptized me when I was a kid, and when I was old enough to kind of figure out how to cook lunch for myself, I was like, well, I don't want to go to church anymore because it just doesn't make sense to me. And all the things that you don't want me to do feel pretty good, you know, like having sex and doing drugs and, you know, all of those things that you just, like, you start to while out, and even experimenting with, like, other genders and having sex with people of the opposite. So, you know, it's kind of like just like the 1960s revolution in a microcosm of my life. I was just like, okay, like, I'm not a part of this anymore. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. And, you know, they're still going to be like, yeah, I was raised Christian, but I'm not that anymore. And I think a lot of people who are Muslim right now, like, I screwed up my van and I had to get CIA called. So a guy comes and he picks me up in a big truck, and he's a Muslim sitting behind the wheel, about 30. He tells me that within 10 minutes of talking, because I love to talk, right?
Right.
And he is a religious Muslim, but he's not, like, dogmatic at all. And he says he could possibly be, because he has this arranged marriage that just isn't really working out.
Aww.
And so he's seeing this other girl on the side, totally, like,
oh shit.
That's big sin, right? And he's talking about, I can't like alcohol, I more like weed. I know we're not supposed to smoke. And I'm just like, oh my God, man. So it's like these people, these Muslim people that everyone is so afraid of. It's like, they're just like you and I, man. They just want to chill and they have their dogma, but, like, it's usually the older generation that's trying to push that. Like, it's weird to think Muslim boomers, like, people from the Middle East that are just like fundamentalist Islam, and they come here and they protest at the elementary schools in Birmingham, UK, and they're like, oh, the LGBT curriculum, like, it must be stopped, like, gay has no place in Islam. But then, you know, the kids are inside like, come on, mom, like, go home, just, like, leave me alone. Like, so I'm pretty sure that, like, most kids, especially Gen Z and a lot of millennials too, it's like, we're not fundamentalist at all in our religious beliefs. And, like, I think that's where the terms, like, non-religious Muslim or, like, non-religious Jew or, like, non-religious Christian, they come in, because, like, we have a moral foundation like, it may be based in those religions, but they are not adhered to as though they're dogma. And I'm pretty sure that, like, the Western wave of culture is just coming on so hard that there's no way that the masses will be able to resist it, despite their religion, whether it's Islam or Christian or Judaism or Hindu or Buddhist. I think that everybody's just getting swept up with, you know, their phones and having sex and, like, just the whole new wave of Western civilization, modernity.
Yeah.
So I'm not scared of any religion except for, that new religion, modernity. Because I think that's the one
Yeah.
it's about.
Yeah. Well, no, I think you're right, and I think that is a point that gets lost in a lot of like the kind of right-wing discussions about diversity and immigration and stuff. Is that it's just like you said, once a few generations have grown up in a secular Western country with secular Western freedoms, like I don't think the threat of religious extremism holds much water.
No, and I think that we're 3 generations into probably the biggest cultural engineering experiment that has ever been orchestrated in the history of people kind. Let's throw that one out there.
Yeah, that's our little ode to Justin.
Ode to Justin. Oh, Justin. Yeah, I think we're about 3 generations in since the 1960s. Everybody kind of talks about the 60s and how the big like psychedelic movement really like revolutionized the way that people think. It was kind of like one of the large factors. I guess psychedelics were a large factor in that 1960s revolution, and I think that spearheaded a lot of like the new activism movements like veganism, or even just like trying to tear down the system or abandoning traditional family values. Just anything like that. I mean, the whole like hippie generation, I think, that's where it really, really started. And those people and the generation under them, those are the people that run all of our businesses now. It's not like these weird kind of robber baron bankers anymore that are all like, it's like we have a lot of like ex-hippies, like now I guess you'd call a rich hippie a yuppie. A lot of these people are running the companies, and that's why you see like big tech being so radical in their politics and trying to be enforcers. I think it's just because like we are a couple of generations down the line, and the people that run these companies, they are they're a product of the 1960s revolution, whether or not they know it. And I don't think that specifically was natural, but just before I get into that, I think that maybe 3 generations from now, because like now we're having our big waves of Muslim immigration. They say by 2060 Muslims will be the largest religious denomination in the world. I'm pretty sure 3 generations from now, probably the same thing will have happened to them if they're exposed to Western culture in the way that we were over the last couple of decades. It might even happen faster for them because everything's happening faster now. But
it's hard to say. And just before, there was another kind of point in what you were saying that I wanted to touch on with the rise of kind of the social media dictating how people live and who they talk to and on what terms and everything, and how that could lead to some really like kind of terrifying scenarios, right, with creating this kind of 2-tier population, is that it's very similar to what's already being instituted in China with the social credit systems, right? Where
the social credit system, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That if you participate in wrongthink, then they can take away your ability to traverse high-speed rail. That was one example I think that Vice Media exposed. There was one man who got into a physical altercation with his wife. He wasn't able to pay in time, and rather than having a 2-hour train to work, I think he had to drive multiple hours, like way, way, way longer. And this is just a result of his social credit score slipping below the default 1,000.
And then
you can pay the money to get your score back up too. Just pay the government, and it's like, oh, here you go. We'll give you some brownie points or whatever.
But then of course the lower your score gets, the more restricted your kind of earning potential becomes, and the more expensive life becomes for you. So it's like, how do you dig yourself out?
The association factor too is, if you associate with somebody with too low of a score, your score then takes a hit. So they're trying to ostracize these people. They're trying to isolate these people, and they are trying to disappear them from public discourse altogether. I mean, even so far as separating them from their friends and family. Yeah. Like just in terms of day-to-day interaction. Like they don't want them around anymore, not even just on the network, but these scores follow you around like everywhere you go.
Yeah. So I think, like the points you brought up, even though, we don't have like a CCP style government rolling these things out for us.
Well, not yet.
Not yet, anyway. But yeah, the like you were saying with the examples of the steps these big tech giants are moving in are very similar to the same kind of social credit systems in a lot of freaky ways. So
it's definitely freaky.
Yeah, but anyway, I guess like let's leave the politics aside, kind of, or
Sure.
the hardcore politics aside for a moment, because it's drudgery at
yes,
heart.
Yes.
And yeah, and
it's almost like masochism.
It is a little bit. It's kind of some kind of like weird self-inflicted punishment when you're interested in politics. I don't know, some kind of weird self-hatred going on.
Oh my god, we used to call that emo.
Yeah, well, I'm a little bit older, so for me it was goth, but...
Oh yeah, that's making a comeback.
But, yeah, I'm still, I don't know, there's a Marilyn Manson and Rob Zombie show coming to Ottawa later in the summer, and I don't know, I think it's time to let it go. But I might end up going anyway, we'll see.
Bust out the old fishnets?
Yeah, it might be time, I don't know. But I don't know, it might just be like ruining the nostalgia, right? It might just make me sad.
Yeah, see, yeah, that's, seeing somebody out of their prime is never a great thing.
Exactly, like, I'm really torn, do I just cherish the memories the way it was?
Does he still kill it, though? Does Rob Zombie still kill it in
I don't
2019?
Know.
He might still kill it.
He might.
Like, I can't imagine that he would get any less scary as he got older. That is sort of his angle, right? He's trying to... True.
He's got that whole, like, horror movie shtick, so it might work. It might work. But, yeah, and let's leave the politics aside, because politics ultimately, I think, is actually a product of culture and not the other way around. So let's get more into some of the other stuff you've talked about on your channel, which is psychedelics. And like we were kind of leading into talking about the like the 60s counterculture revolution.
Yeah, sure. So that's a huge topic for me personally, because I have actually indulged in a few of the classical psychedelics like psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, DMT, and I've always done my research a lot, and I would not say that I wouldn't recommend it to anybody without them doing the research first and knowing exactly what to expect and reading a number of case reports before getting into anything like that. But it really revolutionized the way that I thought about life, and it kind of gave me an outside perspective as to how I was living my own life. And I think that psychedelics they allowed me to escape some of my programming, in that, you see the law as this concrete structure, you see the government as this concrete structure, but really it's just this air of authority that we enforce upon ourselves. And I lived in a van for a couple of years, actually, on and off, just during the summers, not because I had to move into my car or anything, but just because I lived in Toronto, in like a closed-in little condo that had subway access from the building, and I was just spending way too much time inside. So I figured, what better way to just like completely contrast this last year than to just get a camper van with a bed in the back, and I'll just live out of this, and I'll just drive across the country, sort of thing.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I did that, kind of lived on that for a little bit, and that led me to see how authority, especially outside of the cities, is really enforced by the people themselves, and sometimes just you're enforcing it personally. I know that there was a fire ban on Manitoulin Island, which is a beautiful place in Ontario that I love to vacation on.
Yeah.
And so I take my van there, I take the ferry and drive around. There's a fire ban, right? So you can't have any fire. And I'm just thinking, like, there's no one around, and I'm on a beach, and there's no trees in sight. And it'd be really nice to have a fire so I could cook some hot dogs. And So I ended up looking up the bylaw, and I guess even if there is a fire ban if the circumstance involves you cooking food for yourself, you're still allowed to make a 3 foot square fire, 3 foot cubed fire. So it can't be any taller. I think it's 3 feet or 3 meters. I think it's actually 3 meters. So you can make a fairly big fire provided it's you have water available to you, like even during a fire ban. But the whole thing was I was so afraid to do it because of the air of authority, despite there being no one around, anything like that. But I think through the use of psychedelics specifically, and even just having escaped the city and spending some time in isolation just as a person in nature in sobriety, I think that allowed me to escape some of the programming and realize how psychedelics were implemented maybe in 1960. And I think this is what started the whole rabbit hole. But in 1960, when psychedelics were implemented, possibly to uproot the social structure of our society, and maybe not by accident either. So when I started looking into that, it was a result of having watched Joe Rogan, because he gets into the whole. I think he used to be kind of a conspiracy guy, right? Like Joe Rogan questions everything. Yeah. I don't think he questioned anything that closely, but I think he's kind of a shill too. Did you know he's 5'6"?
Yeah. I knew not exactly, but I knew that he was not much taller than me.
Yeah, he's a 5'6", man. I just thought that was hilarious.
Well, you always see him sitting down at the desk, right? And he's pretty like built, so you assume that he's a big dude, but
he's totally not.
Yeah, but if you ever saw him stand up from that chair, it's like, whoa.
Yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was so funny, and some of my friends have been talking about how like evolutionarily we are fitted to find ourselves in certain roles. And I have a joke that goes around my circle of friends is that short people shouldn't lead men. And and it's like this kind of like this really funny thing that we call height supremacy, just as like a big like riff on the whole like the entirety of politics. But I think that Joe Rogan being 5'6" and being like the most popular YouTuber / podcaster out there, and everybody just listens to what this short, angry man, microphone snatcher man has to say. It's just like I just think it's a little ridiculous.
There's got to be some Napoleon jokes in there, I'm sure.
And Napoleon wasn't actually that short. That's a common misconception. He was 5'9", which is pretty tall back then.
3 inches on Rogan.
3 inches on Rogan, yeah. He probably picked him up with a shirt collar. So Joe Rogan he led me down into the psychedelic movement. Yeah. He had a guest on a long, long time ago named Jan Irvin. And I don't know if you're familiar with Logos Media or Jan Irvin, but Joe kind of pissed me off in some of his episodes with Jan, because Jan would start listing name after name after name of people that would have to do with, the kind of like the seminal research and seminal media coverage of psychedelic use in like the 1950s. So Jan would start naming names, and Joe was just like, "Oh man, like I can't handle all these names, man. It's not really our audience, man." And I never noticed him like ever cut somebody off like that, right? Yeah. So I was really intrigued as to Jan, or it's spelled Jan, Jan, like Yarmer Yager. Yeah. Jan Irvin. So I looked into his work quite a bit, and he gets right into Gordon Wasson, which he was originally a credit banker who became vice president at J.P. Morgan Company in like the 1930s. So if you don't know who J.P. Morgan is, it's like, we could go right down into the conspiracy thing, but J.P. Morgan was one of the original bankers in the early 1900s who was in charge of implementing the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States. So he attended that meeting on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia in the United States with like some super powerful people like the Rockefeller family, the Vanderbilts, and they decided, hey, we're going to implement the Federal Reserve Bank. So to reiterate, Gordon Wasson was vice president for J.P. Morgan Co., and the very first article in the West that had anything to do with psychedelics was published by Time Life magazine in 1957. I think it was in May 13th, called Seeking the Mushroom. written by Gordon Wasson, vice president of J.P. Morgan Co. So his whole thing was he went down to Mexico, I think it was Oaxaca, is how it's pronounced, and he participated in some of the magic mushroom ceremonies with a famous shamaness named Maria Sabina, and then he wrote extensively on it, and that was sort of the very first thing to ever reach the United States and the rest of Europe, Canada, things like that, that had anything to do with psychedelics. And he talked about visions, and he talked about like seeing, he just, all psychedelic phenomena was pretty much like listed off in that book, and I feel like that's sort of what started it all. And I find it really fishy that he was vice president of J.P. Morgan Co., which is like, that's a huge company, and J.P. Morgan himself is like a huge player in like this, like the banking system is like, that's
pretty. You don't get much more. Yeah, you don't get much more fundamental than that. Now, see, I'm not as familiar with that aspect of the history of psychedelics. Like I know kind of the history of Albert Hoffman and Sandoz Laboratories and how he created the LSD compound, and kind of how it spread from him to people like Timothy Leary and
Aldous Huxley.
Huxley, exactly, and
Ken Casey, like the whole Mystery Machine crew. That wasn't what they were called.
But so I mean, I'm more familiar with that kind of side of things.
Well, I could take you down a little further even. I mean, I think that the 1960s psychedelic revolution was a sham, like a complete sham. Jim Morrison's dad, he was in the U.S. Navy. George Stephen Morrison.
Yeah.
If you want to look it up.
Yeah, no, this is great. Forces. Yeah, this is great. Let's go with this, because I was the Doors were basically like the first rock band I ever kind of got super into, right?
Yeah.
So there's a Kids in the Hall joke about, being a big Doors fan. We're not gonna go there, but yes, I was a really big Doors fan, and I still am.
Kids in the Hall.
But anyway, yeah. So this is really interesting. Like you were about to go into, Jim Morrison's dad was the captain, I believe, of the.
He's a commander of the naval forces in the Gulf of Tonkin.
Yeah.
In 1964.
Yeah, he was the commander in the notorious Gulf of Tonkin false flag. Now.
Yeah, the incident is, I think, how it's formally referred to. Which sparked the whole Vietnam War.
Yeah. Now, here's some interesting little side notes to this, because I've heard a lot of conspiracy theories about Jim's connection to his dad in this sense, and his possible connections to, like, what would you call, like, COINTELPRO almost, or like CIA ops, or, that he was essentially a plant in the counterculture movement. And
yeah, I mean that's a whole Laurel Canyon thing in California. There was a few bands that came out of Laurel Canyon. There was believed to be like an underground CIA base in some canyon, maybe Laurel Canyon.
Yeah.
Out there, but that was sort of like where those bands derived from, and yeah, they're definitely like full of psychedelic lyrics. Like my friends and I were talking about DMT and the whole like breakthrough phenomenon which happens, and came to my mind the lyrics like the whole try to run, try to hide, you break on through to the other side. Yeah. It's like, he's literally talking about like breaking on through to the other side, which is like kind of what happens if you take those high doses. So I'm pretty thoroughly convinced that he was a plant to try to get psychedelics into the culture, to try to create the first movements of cultural upheaval in the 1960s. And I mean, I think that bands and music, those are sort of like, those are the plants that the government used to try to get people to wake up. Now, I don't know necessarily if they were plants or if every band was like compromised or anything like that, but I think that like all of that aside is that style of music, it really helped people to see through the mirage when they started hearing that these musicians were doing psychedelics, and they started taking these drugs themselves, and I think that's resulted in the collective consciousness that we have today. Our culture is like pretty much completely deconstructed at this point. I saw that the UK has banned ads depicting traditional gender roles. This is a lot in the last like week.
What?
Yeah, it's brutal. It's like brutal. Like
I just saw a story today that some production wing of the BBC has banned all male writing teams or all male writing staff, and I thought that was ridiculous enough. But banning depictions of
traditional gender roles, so like a father and a mother, and they got the kid on the bike, and they're like, "Oh my
god!" Like,
yeah, you can't do that anymore. It's all like has to be. Yeah, you have to be inclusive, and I'm not really sure. Like,
it's so fucked up though that it's so fucked up that the obvious logic doesn't occur to people though, that if you're going to ban, say, traditional family depictions or all male writing teams, what is the appreciable difference between that and banning, say, all women writing teams or depictions of gay families? It's just as backward. It's just as like the. Anyway, side rant.
I think it's just it's different. That's where we're coming from, right? Is that whole that patriarchy meme that people seem to try to perpetuate? Is like, it's like it was always men, it was always white men, and so we gotta put a stop to that. And that's why people are like, we need women to be hired, and we need people of color to be hired, and we need to make sure that like these all white male like sort of like companies just can't exist anymore because they're obviously like creating oppression for perceived minorities, and which I don't necessarily agree with. I think that a lot of the time it's just kind of the way it is when you're in like a European country in like 1950. Is like there were traditional gender roles and there wasn't a lot of multiculturalism back then. So I heard that like before 1960, like the U.S. was like 90% Caucasian, like European heritage, which is like. That would explain why there's so many white people working everywhere. It's like, well, because like, people weren't multicultural yet. Like people still believed in, like the whole like idea of a nation, like blood and soil, like sort of thing. Which I don't know. I don't know if that's like passe now or what. Like I feel good when I go to my grandpa's farm and all that, but blood and soil is like I'm not familiar with it. Like I'm not a warrior. You know what I mean? Like I didn't fight in World War II or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what? That's a cool segue because World War II, I think that's what kind of began the 1960s revolution. I think that have you ever heard of MK Ultra? There was a CIA operation that they were testing LSD on people in the United States of America and in Canada too. Yeah. So I think that Dr. Ewan Cameron. He was he was head of the Canadian Psychiatric Institute and also head of the American Psychiatric Institute and possibly head of the World Psychiatric Institute as well. He's one of the most famous psychologists in the world, Dr. Ewan Cameron. But he actually worked on the MK Ultra project for the CIA at McGill University in Montreal, administering LSD to people, putting people in complete isolation, just trying to create very unique circumstances for consciousness and recording the results to see if he could erase people's identity, implant thoughts, pretty much just outright mind control program. And I found that was really interesting that was all happening behind the scenes while simultaneously there was this like sort of psychedelic revolution happening in the culture. The government's experimenting with those same drugs to try to cull people into, becoming Manchurian candidates. I don't know if you want to get super dark with it like that, but I do you know what? I find that really interesting that the U.S. was doing like mind control sort of work because, especially with like those scientists must have had like a very strange sort of like moral relativism about them, and I wonder sometimes, and I'm not well educated enough in it to know like who taught who was whose apprentice, but I do know for a fact that post World War II, during the Nuremberg trial, there was this thing called Operation Paperclip, where Nazi scientists like Werner von Braun, Joseph Mengele, Mendele, whatever it is,
Yeah.
Robert Oppenheimer. All of these scientists were kind of split up between Russia and the U.S. So they weren't executed because they were like, oh, these guys are so good at science, we'll take them, we'll use them for our own advantage. So I think that like probably what happened was the U.S. like took in a bunch of Nazi scientists, and these Nazi scientists went on to train the people, or maybe even they were the people that orchestrated the MK Ultra experiments in the United States. So although it seems as though the Nazi Party was defeated in Germany, I really think that they just went under a new name, and that they have like imported some of the big players, the biggest players for the big propaganda machine, and they've just imported them into Russia and into America. And we think the war is over, but rather than see, this is where it gets like very like, this is my opinion and nothing else. But I think that like when the Nazis, they saw, I think, the Jewish people as a race that was, what's the opposite of superior? Inferior.
Right.
So they saw them to be, they were like subhuman sort of people. I think that right now, like big government right now is kind of treating the entire world as subhuman. And like these Nazi scientists are not implementing their like weird science and mind control techniques on just the Jewish people, but like pretty much all people, like the masses. And this like sort of dichotomy between the elites on top, like the people that have all of the money, the science, the technology, all of these people are completely separated from what we're subjected to as the masses. And that's just sort of my opinion, but I think that like, yeah, I think that people are being like drawn into concentration camps, which we call cities, where people aren't, we're not educated on how to live for ourselves. We don't know how to hunt. We don't know how to grow food. We don't know how to do any of that for ourselves. If we live in a city, you don't even know how to drive.
Yeah, it's true. A lot of people don't even know how to drive a car.
Subjected to a bunch of advertisements at all hours of the day.
Yeah.
And it's just like there's no grass under your feet, and so that's why I refer to them as concentration camps between like the whole Nazi scientists moving to North America and like the actual circumstances which you deal with when you live in a city. I think it's kind of something to take note of. Maybe not to take too seriously, but with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
What is it a grain of?
A grain of salt works, but it's definitely it's a good thought experiment, you could say, I guess. But
I think that people who are ignorant of their history are doomed to repeat it. And if North America did take in Nazi scientists, we should really pay attention to what the hell they were all on about. I know Edward Bernays is a big name that always pops up when you start looking into how the German people were propagandized by the Nazis. And
yeah. Well, I mean, there are some things, though, that that the Nazis get all the cred for that actually predate them, though. Like the eugenics movement, even in Canada, was a big thing with a lot of supporters, like that you don't really hear about much, the fact that they supported eugenics, well before the Nazis came to power in Germany.
Well, I would imagine that eugenics was much more popular than we really think, because it has an awful ring to it. But I mean, people breed dogs to be a certain way. I mean, I read about there was a Russian biologist, scientist, some Russian man who over the last 50 years he's selectively bred foxes. He's picked the least aggressive foxes in each litter, and he's only bred those ones. He let the other ones out to be the wild. Now, I think it's like 15 generations in, and he has these foxes that are just absolutely docile, like little dogs. They love you. They'll just lick you. They're non-violent, and they're eugenically bred. I think that eugenics has an awful ring when you hear it, just because of the association with the Germans, but I can't imagine that they were the first to implement it.
No, but it was being implemented in some very, some cruel and very unethical ways. Like Nellie McClung, who you might remember from one of the Canadian Heritage Moments, the lady who helped get women the vote in Canada, famous suffragette.
Oh, yeah.
She was a huge proponent of eugenics and the bills that she supported mainly ended up sterilizing like thousands of Native women in Alberta and BC. So,
yikes.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's some dark history. And that's a good thing to remember too when you're talking about taking down statues of people like John A. Macdonald. You know, it's hard to find someone who's been in a, position of real power and influence who doesn't have some dark skeletons in their closet, I think.
I think that's just it. I think that positions of power, I mean, there's that whole Stanford prison experiment.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what do they call it? It's like a dramatized, there's a dramatized version of it on Netflix. It's such a good movie. But there's a whole thing where they let a bunch of students be prison guards and a bunch of people who are in the prison themselves just as prisoners, and they're all volunteers, just students, like freshmen. And the whole like psychology of authority starts getting to the fake police. It starts getting to their heads, and they start kind of like going beyond their authority and start asserting their power. And it's really, really insane how absolute power corrupts absolutely, I guess is that old phrase, right?
Yeah. That experiment is like a kind of scary example of that. But back to the psychedelics, because I think you're kind of leading up to an interesting point or theory about the kind of rise of psychedelics in popular Western culture, and then how now you almost see them being gatekeeped, is maybe one weird way to put it, or you kind of see the infrastructure being set up to regulate them more strictly and bring them under.
It reminds me so much of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. The whole I can't remember what it's Soma, right?
Yeah, it's Soma in Brave New World.
Sort of that like happy chemical, you take it, and then I think the psychedelic movement also has a lot to do with the New Age movement, and that took me right by the ankle too. I went deep into that, into yoga, meditation, Buddhism, Hinduism, even like pantheism, things like that. And I think that the whole, just to put it bluntly, I think that the whole, like the long and short of just like, oh man, just chill out, just like meditate and forget about it, and it'll all be good if you just let it go, man. I don't think that is an effective mindset to have as a citizen of Canada or America or any country right now. I think that we're in far too much trouble to just be sitting there and letting shit go. And I think that was the whole idea. It's like, we'll get these people psychedelics, and then we can do whatever we want, because they'll just be all wrapped up in this whole like spiritual, like, oh, just let it go, man. Spiritual entities, just let it all go. And these people just kind of sit back and they just like let whatever is going to happen. And a lot of people, Jan Irvin, back to that guy from Logos Media, he referred to psychedelics as suggestogens. So he believed that if you were under the influence of psychedelics, that you were more open to suggestion and hypnosis, like things like that. So when I start to think about, okay, what's going to happen when psychedelics are prescribed to people on a daily basis? Do I think that most people are responsible enough to use them in a sacred way? No. Do I think that most people are probably just going to watch television, Netflix, and just allow their minds to be completely molded by the media which surrounds them? That sounds more what's going to happen to me. So I'm not in favor of legalization of psychedelics or regulation of psychedelics. I'd be much more happy to find like somebody just found out by accident that psychedelics are a thing, and they just opened Pandora's box for themselves the first time. Like, it was when I first found psychedelics, I was the first person I knew to had ever taken them, and right. I felt like I found Pandora's box. I was like, oh my God, like, what is everything, right? Like, it opens so many doors. And that was a very exciting feeling for me, and I felt it was extremely sacred. The most sacred thing I'd ever experienced. In fact, like having renounced Christianity as my religion when I was 14, it was a 6-7 years of extremely nihilistic atheism. And that was cut extremely short by having a valid spiritual experience under the influence of LSD. So I think that looking at things like magic mushrooms or LSD just as, kind of happy thing. Oh yeah, we'll just use this to treat your depression. You just take a little here and there, and then, you play your Mario Kart or whatever. It's like, I honestly think it's going to make everything so much worse.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you raise a valid point, and it almost reminds me of the same kind of principle as saying that there needs to be a separation of church and state in some ways. Because like you said, like the psychedelic use and experience can be very spiritual and very like, I think for everybody, really. I don't think anybody who's ever done something like LSD or even mushrooms can say that they're not a little different afterwards,
Nope.
and I don't mean in some like, perma burnout way or something like that, but I mean, it alters your perspective, on everything kind of, or it leaves a mark on it.
It definitely. I think you'll have a hard time finding any indigenous peoples that have used psychedelic sacraments that don't see them as sacred. Like any tribe that at any point that was exposed to a psychedelic of any kind, there's no way that they just were able to banalize it and just be like, oh yeah, like whatever, that's just like another plant, we just kind of smoke. It's like these people, like they discovered it, and that was like, a lot of the time it became a god. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Carlos Castaneda, but he has this whole...
Yeah, vaguely. I've never read
teachings of Don Juan. I guess he was an English anthropology student. He was writing his thesis on like some of the shamanism in the Yaqui Indians of central Mexico.
Yeah.
So he goes down and he takes the peyote and he learns all about like the inner worlds of peyote and some of the psychedelic like superimpositions which affect his perception of the world under the influence. And I just thought it was really, those are kind of cool books. Like, I don't know if he's been debunked or not. I wouldn't doubt if that was like, if people tried to debunk him because of what he was saying was too real for the public to handle. But yeah, you have a hard time finding any evidence of psychedelic use that wasn't treated as sacred. And I think that, prescribing it just as like a happy chemical, like something like your Zoloft,
like Valium or something.
Yeah, just like take your mushrooms today. Like, I think that's just awful. And imagine taking them in a hospital, like while you're like on one of those hospital beds with the parchment paper on it, and you smell the smells, and it's like you're just on psychedelics.
That sounds awful.
Like,
and actually, you know what?
Awful.
Here's something that's true, because there's nothing worse when you're tripping out than fluorescent lights, especially like fluorescent public washroom lights.
Oh my goodness, television screens themselves are really bad, but even just like, those bright, sterile lights that have pitch buzz, and you can almost see the frame rate too, because your senses are a little bit heightened. You can see like the refresh rate of the light. Just like tick, 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 tick.
Yeah, there's nothing that'll ruin like a good trip faster than like really uncomfortable fluorescent lighting. So,
I can think of a few things that would ruin it faster.
Well, okay, yeah, but still, I've found that especially true throughout all of my trips. But
cops can ruin a trip. I got a couple of stories. We were on a beach in Prince Edward County on a few magic mushrooms, and the cops were like, "You can't be here." And we were like, "Oh my god!" And I started to get all worked up inside. I was like, "Oh, what am I going to say? These little bitches, like blue bitches, like telling us to get off this beach. It's obviously not a closed beach. They're trying to say, oh, it's past 10 p.m. The beach is closed." And so I'm on psychedelics, and I'm about to tell these guys off, and I'm thinking, no. And I found my heart just before I opened my mouth, which is great. And I was like, oh, I bet you're just glad we're not nudists. So the cops immediately, they take our side, and they're like, they're actually very thankful that we weren't nudists, because in Prince Edward County, which is, it's like a little beach county in Ontario. It's really nice. There's like sand dunes there.
Yeah.
Prince Edward County, there are aggressive nudists. And there are signs everywhere that say no nudism, but there are signs is because the people are aggressive. And they're like, this is my fucking body. And they'll just like charge the cops with their dicks waving out. And like, so I was able to sweet talk the cops and be like, I guess the beach is closed, but you're glad we're not nudists, eh? And they're like, oh, so we played the game, we sweet talked them, and they got us out of there. But oh my God, it could have been so much worse. Like, I'd imagine just being in that heightened influence and having somebody just see that the beach is closed, like.
Oh yeah, it could have gone sideways for sure.
Yeah. Oh, but psychedelics and culture. I don't necessarily think that they should be used. Just kind of day to day. I think that even if you were to use them spiritually, it's like a few and far between thing to do like once a year, a couple of times a year tops. Like, you go to the cottage, you kind of clean out the pipes, remind yourself of the significance of your spiritual reality, and then you go back to real life. Like, you can't just go and talk to the DMT entities every day and then go to your job working as like at an automotive plant by night. Like, I don't think that humans were cut out to see those things so much. I think that's kind of why we have a priest class too, is like maybe the original art of priestcraft has been lost.
Yeah.
And, but I think that maybe that's why we had that one person to, like, they would be the mediator with the god. So that person would take all the psychedelics, like they'd be the shaman kind of the Christian church, like, almost. But I don't think it's for everybody. I got a few more things to say on it too, which is, I don't know if you want to interject quick, because I feel like I'm just going on and on.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I definitely want to get to everything else you have to say on the topic. But, I was just going to interject that I think, I agree that I don't think you should be regulating mushrooms and psychedelics the same way that you have, like, beer freely available, or even pot. But it's interesting, and I think you made a really good point about the way that people are kind of, I guess, meant to interact with those kind of substances, and that it's more of a specialized thing that's not meant to be done every single day, because it just really rung true with, like, the experience I've had with mushrooms and LSD. I've never done DMT, but because I did a lot of mushrooms, and
there's DMT in the chemical makeup of mushrooms, actually. So if you take enough, you'll have a similar experience.
Okay,
you unlock the same doors.
Interesting.
Yeah, you can look up the molecular structure of psilocybin if you want, and you can see DMT right in it.
But it kind of it just really rung true to me, because, like, I definitely went through a phase as, like, a teenager in early 20s where I tripped out frequently, mushrooms and acid, but like, after a point, and I never had a bad experience like that ended it for me, but I just kind of came to a point where I just felt like I had experienced that, like I had kind of gotten everything that I needed to get from that kind of trip, and I just didn't have the urge to really do it anymore, and I haven't, actually.
That's sort of where I'm at as well. Like, I discovered them. I was very excited. I overindulged. I never had anything bad happen to me necessarily, but I think the quote that I always come back to, and I can remember it off the top of my head because it speaks so truly to me, it's from Alan Watts, who is a lecturer on Buddhism. He was like one of the major lecturers in the 50s and 60s that kind of brought the Buddhism and Hinduism to the West. Really cool guy to listen to. He might have spoken at Esalen Institute, that's a whole other rabbit hole. But anyways, he had this quote that was, once you get the message, hang up the phone. And it was talking about psychedelics, because it's like,
I love that. That's perfect.
Once you're convinced of the psychic reality, the spiritual reality, and having that be like a true reality, not just your subjective reality, but something that's true, I think that eventually you come to a point of understanding where you realize that we were meant to be incarnated as human beings, and that reality may await us in some other form, in some other life. I think that's sort of where I'm at right now too. I take psychedelics maybe once a year now, whereas before, I think in 2016, 2015, one of those years, or over the course of a few years, I definitely took them like hundreds of times, which is way too much for anyone, I'm quite sure. But it
like
was
a weekly to daily basis.
Yes, in high doses too. I was doing astral projection, things like that, invocations, evocations, automatic writing. I was trying to follow in the footsteps of Aleister Crowley, Timothy Leary, people who were doing workings with actual spirit entities. And, I had a lot of success. And to think about it now, 2 years down the road, it scares the shit out of me that was my reality. And I don't think that that's an invalid experience, because you speak to anyone who's done high doses of psychedelics, and they do have experiences with entities on the other side. Now, whether or not that's a fragmented form of their own consciousness, which seems to be speaking to them, or an objectively different entity, like a different consciousness, that's up for debate. I don't think we'll ever really know, because we are limited to our subjectivity. I think that's where faith comes in, you know? Like, you just have to have faith that, like, if you've been there enough times, it'll feel real enough to you that you can have faith that that's probably what's going to happen at the end of the day. You know, if you die, you might go to that same sort of, like, inner place. It's maybe not as clearly defined as our three dimensions here, but as you can see, I've gone far too deep, and I'm very happy to be out of that psychedelic indulgence stage of my life. Right now, I'm very interested in just, like, growing food and being with my family and friends.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I think that psychedelics have taught me to kind of, like, step back from society a little bit, especially modern society, urban society, and return to family values, which is interesting because I think that psychedelics were originally intended to uproot society, and now that society has been uprooted, my use of them has caused me to, you know, pendulum swings.
Yeah.
I'm back to where we started.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely, I mean, I've noticed this myself, and I think of all the people I've talked to basically on any of these topics, is that there's definitely been, like you said, like a pendulum swing where things that used to be traditional are now kind of subversive in some ways, and things that were meant to be subversive have become the authority or the establishment in some ways, and it's basically resulted in Clown World.
Oh, Clown World, that's a great meme.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I don't think you're mistaken in your assessment. We have a lot of conflicting ideologies, and even within the realm of you know, like you can look into any subsect of ideology. You'll be like, okay, the left versus the right. I think that's a total false paradigm. I think that's just designed to compartmentalize people. The right is demonized, so it's so easy to just say, oh, it's on the right and you're not on that side, so it's bad. Like, I know InfoWars. Here, let me just, I got my computer up.
Yeah.
I'm going to type in InfoWars into Google.
Okay.
And what it comes up with, sorry, my internet's just, InfoWars. InfoWars is a far-right American conspiracy theory and fake news website. That's what it says.
Yeah.
Just like, boom, right there. So it's so easy to compartmentalize something that exposes the big government as far-right, and it's just like no one will pay attention to Alex Jones anymore, despite him talking about, like, so many on-point things. You know, I don't think he's, like, I could get all into Alex Jones. I swear we could do another hour sometime.
Yeah.
I know far too much about the connections with Alex Jones, Joe Rogan, the Disinformation Network. We could get into that for a very long time. He's a big shill. Definitely a millionaire, too. Don't trust those guys.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's something I was talking about last week with Alex from Freebird Media, was just like how many of these commentators, influencers, I guess is like the new term for them, but basically just online alternative media personalities have kind of turned out to be huge phonies, you know?
Oh, yeah, big time.
But that's a problem. It's a problem, especially with Jones, right? Because Jones has actually talked about a lot of things that are, yes, memes, but also are grounded in fact. Like gay frogs is the best example, right? It's the most classic meme, and it's hilarious.
But what is that all about? I remember I actually did look into that, and I know that it is valid. It has something to do with like estrogen or hormone levels in the frogs. I can't remember. If you remember any details, I'd love to.
Absolutely. So Alex Jones has a famous rant, which I'm sure everyone's probably vaguely familiar with, at least, about.
Oh yeah, they're turning the frogs gay.
Thank you for doing the Alex Jones voice for me.
I wish my microphone wouldn't peak. I could do it much better.
So, but anyway, and, okay, so technically the frogs are not homosexual and having pride parades, but there is a huge amount of hormones in the water table because there's so many women on birth control, right? And not just that, but all kinds of other pharmaceutical drugs end up in significant amounts, not just in city water, but in lots of groundwater as well. And it's had an effect on frogs and how they develop sexually and how their reproductive capabilities. Not just frogs either, like other amphibians and fish too. Fish are another one that are really affected. And governments have known this for decades. You know, like this has been an ongoing concern, and it's been studied for, like I said, decades now. So you can laugh all you want at Alex Jones ranting and raving like a lunatic about gay frogs, but while you're doing that, you're kind of missing the point that there's a real problem with how all of these chemicals get put back into the environment. So
I think that's his role in the big system. I mean, I'm constantly back and forth between, okay, is he a shill or is he not? And I honestly think that he is probably paid, like controlled opposition. I could just get into it real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
First, here's an example of a connection that you can look up yourself. So Alex Jones had a documentary. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It came out in 2007. It was called Endgame: Blueprint for Global Enslavement. That's what it was called. So it was produced by a company called the Disinformation Company. The Disinformation Company, their webmaster and one of their key people is named Matt Staggs, I'm pretty sure. Now you'll be able to find him on Twitter, and if you go to his Twitter, you'll find out that he is a Joe Rogan Experience talent booker.
Really?
So I found it was really interesting that, you know, there are these kind of connections between like Joe Rogan and Alex Jones. And,
yeah.
Like not insofar as just that, like not just that they're friends, but that like, you know, their companies are working with each other too.
Yeah.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, you can start getting into Aubrey Marcus and the whole On It, like the Nootropic Health organization, which Joe Rogan is always like talking on and on about. They're like dedicated to pushing like plant-based medicine and like spiritual like plant-based healing, things like that. And oh man, you can go so deep on Rogan and Jones. We should save it for another time so I can brush up on my research. So
all right, no worries. Well, but here's one thing I will ask you, somewhat related to that topic, is
sure.
How do you personally like kind of separate the craziness from the reality, especially with people like Jones and Rogan, because there is so much, and even like just regular mainstream fake news, right? I mean, there are things that are like established that they were cover-ups or they were conspiracies or they were outright lies and all of these things. But then, at least in my experience, you can kind of go too far with that, where you drift into like basically flat Earth territory, you know, and
yeah,
it's hard to
rough territory.
What? Sorry?
That's awful territory.
Yeah.
To find yourself in. I mean, specifically if you believe in the flat Earth, that's worse than being. What a lot of people do is they say they're Earth shape agnostic, so they can kind of get the best of both worlds. They're like, oh, I don't know for myself. I'll never be able to truly know if NASA is lying or not. But it gets really.
What a cop-out.
You go super deep into that, and it gets scary. I think you got to protect yourself at a certain point from disinformation, and I think that there are a number of disinformation agents which are out there on YouTube, kind of innocuous people too, right? Just like small-time YouTubers like Eric Dubé. I don't know if he's independent, if he's not independent, but I know that a lot of people were led astray. Now they're thinking, oh, the Earth's flat. Maybe it's not flat. There are such better things that we could all be focusing on as a population. And the fact that, you know, people are so like, it's just so convinced of something that may or may not be true that it's very likely that they're going to be able to prove one way or another. It just isn't good for anybody. I think to answer your question, how I sift, how I separate the wheat from the chaff. First of all, I look deeply into the history of every single person who like is a researcher who I like look into. I try to find out where they're coming from, like what their personal experience is. David Icke is a great example of somebody who is just completely demonized by the mainstream, mainstream YouTube, mainstream media. He's like the reptilians guy. If you're familiar. So I was like, holy shit, reptilians guy, like fuck this guy. And even though he has like 12 books, it's written about like 9/11 and is like the formation of Israel, and like he has so many books like written on so many things that have nothing to do with his reputation. Well, you hear the reptilians thing, and then you're like, okay, yeah, forget this guy. We're just going to throw him right out. But then you look into David Icke's history, and I think the reason that he talks about the reptilians is because if you actually look into it, I think it was the late 80s, he did ayahuasca. He did like a whole ceremony of ayahuasca, which he had a series of visions which like exposed to him this whole new reality in which like he was able to discern that like the royal family was descended from what's depicted in ancient myth as like reptilian humanoids, like as and it's like I haven't looked deeply enough into it to give you specifics either. Like I had years and years ago, but it's like when you hear David Icke reptilians, you're like, oh, what a crazy person.
Yeah, but I know. I mean, I know a lot of the David Icke lore and like his background before he became like a fringe author and everything.
Yeah, he's a sportscaster, right?
Yeah,
Local, right? So strange. So I don't know. I tend to think of him differently now, like in that perspective, especially having done the psychedelics myself. Is like, well, maybe it's an easy way to banalize someone. It's just like, oh, he's the reptilians guy. Well, forget everything he says, even though he talks about so many other things, right? Like, so I just try to learn everything I can about all my researchers, and everything that they say, I try to double check, triple check, as much as I can.
Yeah.
Because history is controlled too. Like people write history, the winners usually. So it's really difficult to actually know the truth. And I think that at the end of the day, you have to have a sense of humility in that, like, you are probably wrong about a lot of things. Like, I know that I'm likely wrong about a lot of the things that I've talked about today. And I'm willing, like, absolutely to hear, you know, how maybe I'm mistaken about this thing or that date or that person. And I'm willing to change my opinion about things. And I think that's what's great about having conversations and like opening up dialogue with people, is that we're able to evolve our understanding of the world, and that's why things like this are so important to me, and I guess to you too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's basically the mission of Freethinkradio. It's just to, you know, make it available to people coming from all different angles. And all different interests, too, you know? But, yeah, fuck, there's still, do you have a bit more time? How are you doing for the night?
I could do a little bit more time if you want to keep going.
Yeah,
doesn't matter to me.
Well, there's just a couple things, you know, we'll get to before we wrap it up, I guess.
Sure, you probably prepared some questions, and I've just been going on and on.
No, it's all good. It's better to have, you know, this kitchen table. It's meant to be like a kitchen table casual conversation.
I'm actually at my kitchen table right now.
Nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, so final point on the kind of, topic of psychedelics and history and the gatekeepers of such things. You've talked a bit about Graham Hancock and how you see him fitting in to this this subject area. So
yes, this is one of my favorite topics to get into too, and it was really misconstrued in my video because I kind of jumped the gun on making it. So I'd love to get into that.
Yeah, let's do that. So, because I thought it was really interesting that, I don't know much about Graham Hancock's work in the area of psychedelics. I'm more familiar with his work talking about ancient history. So I saw him recently, or on his most recent appearance on Joe Rogan, and I thought it was kind of nice, actually, to see him being vindicated for some of the things he said about, you know, the need to rewrite our understanding of ancient history, basically. And there's a lot of archaeological evidence that's come out now since he originally put those theories out there that has basically given a lot more weight to what he's saying and kind of vindicated him in some ways. But you are more familiar with another side of Graham Hancock. So
well, that's kind of what I feel like. I almost regret in my original titling of that video was Graham Hancock Exposed. I was trying to ride on the whole like exposed like clickbait idea. There's a YouTuber named Matthew North. He's extremely intelligent young kid, and he gets into so much stuff about the intellectual dark web specifically.
Okay.
And so I was trying to ride that with the whole Graham Hancock Exposed thing. And I think people misconstrued that as me thinking that he has like a malevolent agenda to impose upon the world. Whereas I think he's just showing what he's found in his research, whether or not, that disinformation network that I mentioned earlier with Joe Rogan, Alex Jones, and Matt Staggs.
Yeah.
Graham Hancock publishes under that. He published a book I think it was 2014, called The Divine Spark, which he edited in the disinformation network. So he's part of that same network too. He makes several $1 million a year doing talk tours and things like that. So he's definitely and he's spoken at Essalon as well, which is it's like a think tank in the United States dedicated to psychedelic consciousness, like the new movements of society sort of thing. You see thinkers like Terence McKenna, they speak there frequently.
Okay.
And a lot, it was government funded too. Like there was, I think there was Rockefeller funding specifically, in Essalon. So a lot of people are like, oh, that's big fishy psychedelic think tank funded by the Rockefellers, right?
Right.
Graham Hancock spoke there. I'm pretty sure in the 80s, and he's recognized. You can look into some of the literature. You can see his face. He's in the pamphlets. But yeah, I'm not trying to demonize Graham Hancock. Really, I was just what I was mostly trying to do was try to distill some of what he was saying in that there could be links between the use of ayahuasca, the DMT containing plant, and some of the mythology of Christianity and kind of like neo-Christianity, which is being referred to as Gnosticism.
Yeah.
I guess there were some documents that were found after the fact, or maybe they were removed during the Council of Nicaea. There are a couple different factors which came into play, which created the Holy Bible, the New Testament, which we know today. But there were a number of biblical books which were removed. When Graham Hancock implements these books, to his understanding, he seems to come out of it with this idea, and I guess he's fitted in with Gnosticism, and this is sort of my idea. It's it all comes back to this, this new idea of religion kind of being dissolved by Western culture, kind of being spearheaded by Reverend Joe Rogan, and just giving people the psychedelics. And okay, so let me break it down for you. So in Gnosticism, this is what Graham Hancock spoke about in 2016 at his Psychedelics and Civilization lecture, which I actually attended in Toronto. I saw the man in the flesh. Great speaker. No notes. He just speaks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Gnosticism, the primary negative entity is known as the demiurge. This is sort of like the Christian Satan, the thing that's trying to prevent you from being your best self, to tempt you. It's the evil entity. So Gnosticism has that, the demiurge. Now the idea is, in Gnosticism, Christianity was flipped on its head, so that the demiurge is actually what Christians think of as God or Yahweh. So God or Yahweh is actually an extremely oppressive, malevolent, controlling entity, which is trying to call humanity for their own will. And what Gnosticism kind of prescribes is that you take the fruit of knowledge yourself, and you experience gnosis, you experience wisdom. And if you think metaphorically, especially when Graham Hancock is speaking at a conference called Psychedelics and Civilization, you take the fruit of knowledge from the serpent in the Garden of Eden, or also known as the light bearer Lucifer. I think he was equating it to the light bearer, when light hits an object, you are then able to recognize the object, and that's knowledge. So it's the knowledge bearer too. It's all translation metaphorics, right? So what I saw is you take the forbidden fruit, you take the psychedelics, Lucifer gives you the psychedelics, the light bearer, and so like what I think that Graham Hancock is pushing is sort of like this new religion that's based on the psychedelics, and he talks about Mother Ayahuasca, like the spirit of the planet, and I think that that's probably what we're going to be dealing with in the next like 50, 60 years. People are going to forget all about Christianity. Like, well, you're still going to have your fundamental. Like, you're never going to forget all about it. But I think that the main, like right now, there's a lot of atheists, right? I don't think that that is going to be a thing for much longer. I think that like if psychedelics are going to be as implemented as I think they're going to be in our societies, I think that we're going to have a new world religion, which is going to be spearheaded by guys like Joe Rogan, Graham Hancock, Jordan Peterson. Even he's doing his whole like biblical series lectures, doing like. He's doing like almost like interpretive analysis of the biblical stories and distilling like some of the things like that. To create like more, to shed light onto more of the meta narrative aspect of things. So I think that there's a new meta narrative that's being created via the psychedelic movement, via the disinformation company, and via just like Western culture being imposed on all of these people who have traditionally practiced religion and have now like become disillusioned with their old systems of control, like i.e. like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, etc., etc. So I think that was my point with Graham Hancock, is I think that he's spearheading a new religion.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people thought that I was trying to make him out to be a bad guy. So I just want to say it's like I actually love listening to Graham Hancock, and I'm like I'm pretty sold on the fact that there is like a spiritual reality which is more accessible via psychedelics than it is via Christianity,
right?
At the very least. In terms of like, are we supposed to access it as human beings? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't, but I think you and I both agree that once you've accessed it enough, you kind of get the idea. You get the message and hang up the phone sort of thing. Yeah, that's my big spiel with Graham Hancock.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. But it makes me wonder, like, how you see, because one thing that I've noticed is kind of a resurgence of Christianity, and it's kind of funny. It's kind of like part of this upside down clown world thing where things that used to be passé and establishment are now like edgy and rebellious, you know? And I've like even noticed like a lot of
conservatism being the new punk rock.
Yeah.
So lame. It's not punk at all.
Gavin tried. He really tried. He tried hard.
He's a try-hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew you'd get the setup there. But yeah, I've even noticed a lot of YouTube, like big YouTubers who were all part of this kind of, atheist, new atheism kind of push from, I don't know, like earlier 2010s, that are now like, I'm not as secular as I used to be, and I'm returning to my family's like Christianity based roots, and I'm embracing the church. Even Stefan Molyneux has, and this could be because it helps him get more clicks with his audience, who I think has turned in that direction. But even him, a staunch atheist for years and years and years, which was totally part of his persona online, has now taken this more apologetic stance towards Christianity and more basically endorsing it.
Do you know, I could comment on this, actually. I think I have an appropriate response.
Okay, awesome.
So, I don't like Ben Shapiro. I think he's another short, angry man that shouldn't lead men.
Right.
But he had a good point when he was talking about religion and society. And he said that society is a suspension bridge. Western society is a suspension bridge between Greek moral philosophy, like from the time of Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, and Judeo-Christian values. So we're a suspension bridge between an unmovable doctrine and like this philosophy which is ever evolving toward like ultimate truth, but guided by humanity. So he would talk about society as a suspension bridge between those two things. And anytime that we went too far toward religion, we'd end up with this like tyrannical theocracy. But anytime we ended up too far away from religion, we would end up with sort of like this failed utopia. And I don't know what it is about humans, but we have a really bad habit of trying to create utopias.
Yeah, even though it's totally contrary to our nature.
We don't have long enough attention span with time preferences to create utopias. Like a lot of people compare human beings to gerbils in their ability to deal with climate change issues because they happen so slowly, right? So I think that this is just a natural reaction. I think it's another one of the another incident of the pendulum swinging back to the other direction. I think we got a little too close to this idea of utopia. And I think a lot of people have seen like that it's not going to work out. The SJW sort of image is not being pushed anymore. It's kind of seen as cringy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm doing a new video right now for the future, which is I've created a blank YouTube account and I've let the algorithm determine the perspective of the account on all social issues. So I just type in a social issue and I take the first opinion that YouTube recommends. And so I'm trying to figure out what type of person YouTube will create. And what I figured out is that YouTube is sick of the SJW.
That's amazing. That's a really interesting experiment. I want to stay updated on that. I want to follow what kind of person YouTube becomes.
I put about 5 hours into it so far.
Okay.
I'm gonna put in another 5 hours because I just watch videos and take notes. Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, I could give you what I've got so far is that the YouTube NPC is anti-Republican, pro-Trump, pro-free speech, and believes in climate change and that it needs to be stopped. They're pro-gay marriage, pro-gay adoption, pro-abortion, pro-vaccine. They recognize the difference between sexes, but also view the ideas of men and women as actions, aesthetics, and roles. So it's I can keep going with this. I have all these notes, but I'm going to save it for my actual video.
Yeah,
but,
like, save it. But that's fascinating.
Kind of in the middle.
That's an amazing
idea.
Radical
centrism.
Yeah. That's really cool. So are there, I don't want to keep you too long, but this has been a great conversation. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me too. I mean, it has been really great, and I could just keep going and going, but I'd love to sharpen up my notes on a few things, and we could always do another one, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, man. We'd be happy to have you back for sure.
Cool.
So,
I'll have my co-host with me too.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'll have to have you back. 'Cause I actually wanted to ask you a little bit more about, like your projects as a musician and what your interests and thoughts are around stuff like that. But I guess we'll save it for next time. But just before I let you go though, besides that amazing, brilliant experiment, what is there anything else you want to plug or anything else coming up for the Kilometer Media channel? Like where do you want to go with it?
We've got a ton of ideas. Do you know what? I think that we want to go toward comedy.
Nice.
Our main thing is political commentary right now, and I think that our greatest tool is comedy. I don't think that angst or anger or any of those emotions are a healthy way to reach people unless the circumstances are absolutely dire. And I think right now comedy is probably our best tool for reaching people that aren't already in it. Because I don't know. So we have a few funny video ideas. Because we don't align any which way politically, we think that we can get away with quite a bit of stuff. Like we have the Antifa flag behind our bear, but then we also talk about how Antifa is Soros funded. We're just like a walking, talking paradox that no one can really understand. They want to try to label us as one thing or another, but they're going to have a really hard time. So just I'll give you a quick expose on a video that we're probably going to shoot in the near future. We've ordered a Make America Great Again hat off the internet to set it up for one of our actors. But we're going to have two plants. You know what a plant is in terms of acting?
Yeah.
So we're going to have these people. We're going to go to a peace rally in Toronto where Antifa is demonstrating. And we're going to have have one of our friends dress up as an Antifa member, and they're going to go join that crowd. And we're going to have another one of our friends join with Pegida or Proud Boys or any Sons of Soldiers of Odin or whatever, any of those stupid right-wing organizations that just need to shut the fuck up and go away. Well, maybe, I don't know. They don't need to shut the fuck up, but, like, they're pretty fucking cringy. But anyways,
smarten the fuck up, maybe.
Smarten the fuck up, yeah, like, I don't know. They just, like, do you see what happened in Hamilton? Type in Hamilton Antifa when you're done this. It happened like 3 days ago. So fucked. Antifa and the Soldiers of Odin and all that. But anyways, we're going to get somebody to dress up as a cringy right-wing Trump supporter, somebody to dress up as an Antifa, and there's going to be a legitimate protest happening. And what I'm planning on doing is creating a fight between them. But there are plans, right? So it's a fake fight. But everyone's going to watch it go down, and then they're going to fall in love. And I think it'll piss so many people off, and and it'll be so funny to so many people, and we'll be filming it as though it's a drama, so we can post it up after as like an expose of their love story. They'll be able to go out to dinner. We'll do like little like side shots where they can talk about like, oh, you know, I used to think that like it was really bad to like, you know, used to think about these, and I just think it would be so funny just to make a big joke out of the whole thing.
Yeah, and then a cut scene to like, you know, like, so what's your favorite kind of tea?
Yeah, right. Like they're just like they're fighting in a protest, and then the violence becomes a little sexual, and then they're making out, and then it's like boom. It's like, so what's your now they're picking out like they're picking out curtains for the house, like, kind of thing. I think it'd be so comedy is our future. That's what we're trying to go toward. I'm really confident in comedy's ability to broaden understanding and bring people together in a healthy way.
Yeah, man, and remember, as a sub-genius, the code to live by is fuck them if they can't take a joke. So
fuck them if they can't take a joke. I love it.
Yeah.
Church sub-genius.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mitchell. It's been really fun. I'm glad we did it, and I'm glad to have you here at the kitchen table on Freethinkradio. And everyone should head over and check out Kilometer Media on YouTube. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Martha. I hope we can do this again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Whenever your bandmate / co-creator is available, we'll definitely do this again. I'd
right
love
on.
to. Awesome. All right. Cheers, man.
Yeah, have a good night.
You too. And
peace.